I'll let you know when we're ready.
Hello.
Hello, Mr. Driggs. How are you this morning?
I'm good. Audio seems to be working.
Yes, sir.
Hey, Mr. Newton, can you?
Everyone, and welcome to the October 26th Transportation Planning and Environment Committee meeting. I want to welcome everybody who's with us online. We're going to start the meeting. We have quite a bit to get to today, so we have 2 hours allocated today to our meeting. And we'll get to that right after we have introductions. And I'm going to start with everybody in the room and start with the birthday boy, our vice chair. Happy birthday, Mr. Eggleston.
Thank you very much. Larkin Eggleston, Committee Vice Chair.
John
Howard, United Jackson, Office of Constituent Services.
Taiwo Joba, Planning Director and City Manager's Office.
Dave Fenton, Rezoning Program Manager.
Thank you, and then we'll go to our committee members online, and I'm sorry you guys didn't come in because you don't get birthday cake, but go ahead, Mr. Newton.
Madam Chair, happy birthday, Mr. Vice Chair. Matt Newton, the District 5 Rep Committee member.
Do we have Mr. Winston? Okay, why don't we go ahead with, Mr. Driggs there?
Happy birthday to him. Happy birthday to him. I'm here. 367, Ed Driggs.
How about our staff? Allison, do you want to?
Morning, I'm Allison Craig, Deputy Planning Director.
John?
Good morning and happy birthday, Mr. Vice Chair. John Lewis, Executive Director, CATS.
Go ahead, Liz.
Good morning and happy birthday as well. This is Liz Babson, the CDOT Director.
Okay, I see Tim.
Good morning, everyone. Tim Porter, Chief Urban Forester and Planning.
Okay, Mr. Winston is in. You want to say hello to everybody this morning?
Good morning, happy Monday. Braxton Winston, committee member.
Okay, great. And I see Laura Harmon.
Good morning, this is Laura Harmon with Planning, Design, and Development.
Okay, Monica. Monica Holmes on from Planning. How about Kelly?
This is Kelly Goforth, Manager of Project Development for CATS.
Okay, and David and That's, okay, so I think I've got everybody. If I've missed anybody, please go ahead and speak up. Okay, if not, we'll get right on, and we're going to start, go back to Allison and get an update on the tree canopy ordinance. So go ahead, Allison, and take it away.
I assume someone will pull out the presentation.
Allison, hold on one moment.
You'll have a full agenda, so I can start while they pull up the presentation. Good morning, Mayor Pro Tem, members of council, and happy birthday, Vice Chair. I'm Allison Craig, Deputy Planning Director, and joined here by Tim Porter, Chief Urban Forester, and we'll be doing this presentation together. This is a presentation on the Tree Canopy Action Plan, and this is an effort to define policies related to tree canopy as well as ordinance concepts for the UDO. The city has a long history in prioritizing its tree canopy. For the last 20 years, we've had a number of different tree canopy analyses done. We've had some text amendments along the way. But in 2019, we did a small text amendment and found that the community was very engaged and protect and enhance the city's tree canopy, and found that while the tree canopy would be considered as part of Charlotte's future growth plan, the 2040 plan, that we really needed a dedicated effort to make sure that those priorities were being heard by our community. So we assembled a stakeholder group to work on the tree canopy action plan. So the main goals and deliverables for this effort the development of tree canopy specific policies that will be integrated into the 2040 plan, as well as creating sort of a draft set of regulatory concepts that will then be part of the framework for the Unified Development Ordinance in the future. Is there any luck on the presentation?
Allison, either we can switch the agenda, or we can't get it a load right now. So it's up to Madam Chair or Ty if you want to switch.
Ty, should we go ahead and move to the rezoning? Okay, we're going to go to item number 2, which was a council referral on rezoning process improvements. And we're going to hear from Laura Harmon and Dave Patine, who have been working really hard on what we think could be some great improvements that will allow the community to get more involved earlier on and understand rezoning plans that are coming to their area. So, Ty, do you want to take it over, or should I have Laura or Dave?
So, thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. This is something you've been waiting to hear from us. We've met to discuss this when Dave first joined us, but we also had from the council in January at the retreat that this is a subject you wanted to discuss further. So this is a council referral item. So we did, it's kind of a two-step process. The first one we came to you was part of the 90-day assignment that Mayor Lyles gave us back in December, and we came to you some months ago to kind of share with you what we're thinking of in terms of matching growth with infrastructure and how that affects the rezoning process. Dave is going to touch a little bit on those items as well today, but key in on some of the things that we've been thinking about with regards to getting the community more involved or engaged in the process. We're definitely not going to be able to exhaust the discussion today, but at least we get a start, and then we can either, based on your recommendation, go forward to council with some of what you're hearing today, or come back to you, to this body in the future. So I'll hand off to Dave now to run through it, and we can both address. Laura is also on. I think the three of us can address specific questions when we get there. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ty. As Ty mentioned, this was a referral that we took on and really wanted to identify and provide new actions that the city can take to enhance this rezoning process, really with the focus on community engagement. Some areas that we're looking to focus on: access to information, making some improvements in that area, opportunities for citizen engagements, looking at how we can clarify and enhance some of those opportunities also, as well as develop some more educational materials on the rezoning process and how folks can stay involved in that. So next slide, please. So as we talked through this early on, we just want to kind of connect all the dots of what we're working on with the comprehensive plan, the Unified Development Ordinance. We have the mobility initiative with Connect. We also have the mobility plan, and then the bus priority study. All of these ongoing processes that we have really do have an impact also on the rezoning process and vice versa, to where we really need to make sure that the process that we have in place is one that can support these initiatives, and really that when we take petitions through the process, that we're looking at it through all these different lenses and how we can better integrate the goals and initiatives of these different plans into what could be a conditional rezoning or a conventional rezoning, and how to engage the community as well to make sure that they understand how all those goals are linking together and how the rezoning process works within that. Next slide. So back in, I think it was sometime in the summer, June or July, I can't remember exactly which month, I know CDOT talked with y'all about updating traffic impact policies and ordinances to kind of look again at more of a global view of traffic impacts through the rezoning process, and just want to again connect the dots of where we started and how this is all kind of working together for one large process overhaul. They talked about modifying the traffic impact study, maybe looking at the thresholds being a little bit different, look at different mitigation options to consider transportation demand management strategies, and some others, for just to provide a little bit more, I guess, more of an overview of traffic impacts and transportation impacts from a rezoning standpoint. And I think that's something that we're continuing to partner with CDOT on. And so we'll continue to work through that, but just again want to connect the dots of where we've come from and how we're getting into this process improvement. So next slide. We also had the priority corridor investment discussion. This talked a little bit about bus priority projects, which for dedicated bus lane, queue jumpers, microtransit, things like that. And again, these are areas and policies that, as we go through a rezoning process, do we have projects in these corridors? Do we have projects that could further enhance some of these initiatives? And how are we making sure that we fold these initiatives into that, and making sure that that's all captured through the rezoning process if we have that opportunity? So that takes us to some of the next steps that were discussed. Again, the strategic mobility plan, the bus priority study, CDOT project planning and design, where we looked at target capacity investment areas. All of these items, including, like I said, the comp plan, UDO, are really an opportunity for us to kind of bring everything together. And when the rezoning process comes into play and we have opportunities to further some of these initiatives and really capture some of the goals through that process, we want to make sure that we're really doing that. And also, it comes back to that community engagement. We go through, how do we enhance that so folks can actually see not just what the project has from an impact standpoint on their community, but also in all the plans and initiatives that we're undertaking as a city to improve things like transit and traffic improvements. So if we get into the next slide, this is where we really want to get into the kind of meat of the discussion, and that's the process part and public engagement. Actually, one more slide further, please. Thank you. So some of the goals that we wanted to really talk through were, how do we improve the community's understanding of the process, and when it comes to rezoning, ways that they access information, ways that they can actively be involved and engaged in the process. Some of the things that we know we do certainly have an impact on where folks live in their communities. So how do we make sure they have all the access to information they need to stay informed and engaged, and really ensure that various users, both the community, the development community, folks that may not even live in Charlotte, but also just have an interest in things that we may be working on, how can they access all that information about things that are changing from a zoning standpoint in their community? So next slide. So currently, we really handle public outreach through petitioners rather than through planning staff or neighborhood leaders. And the way that we go through that process is, when we get a petition in, we create a mailing list of all the adjacent property owners, all the property owners that live within 300 feet of that subject property. and also neighborhood organizations that are registered with the city within a mile of that petition. So we generate that mailing list, and that's what we use throughout the process, both on the city side as well as the petitioner side, to let folks know what's going on in the community. So essentially, when we get a petition in, we send out a letter within a couple weeks of that petition being filed as a courtesy notice to give people a heads up. And then if it's a conditional plan, that outreach with the community meetings, that's again generally led by the petitioners. There are instances where staff does hold meetings with the community to discuss different projects. We have a couple right now that we've had some heavy citizen engagement on, and we've taken opportunities to meet with the community just as a department with planning and CDOT. But again, that's primarily led by the petitioner side or the development team side to hold those community meetings. And we provide all those notices pursuant to state law, council policies. The legal notice for a public hearing is state law. The courtesy notice is a council policy. So we go above and beyond currently, what we're required to do per the state, which, I think that's a good thing to put out there. But again, we need to recognize that we can do probably some improvements. We have an opportunity where we can really proactively educate and engage residents more effectively. And how do we start to take those opportunities on and really create a process that better integrates that community outreach and community input. Next slide, please. So again, when we go through the process for notification, just to give you an idea of where we are, everyone's familiar with the signs. Those go up fairly quickly when a petition comes in. Those courtesy mail notices go out within a week or two after the submittals at the end of each month. So folks get a really good heads up, a couple months notice that a petition's been filed. Community meeting notices go out from the petitioner. Those are put out pursuant to state law as well. They have to give plenty of notice before they hold a community meeting, at least 10 days before they hold that meeting with the community. And then again, legal mail notices are a city function, and the legal ad in the newspaper is also a city function. So just that community meeting is the one that the petitioner is really the main responsible party for. But again, we create the mailing list and use the same one for all of those notices, so it's consistent throughout. So again, next slide, please. Those are some of the things that we currently do. And again, I think this is where we need to recognize that we're doing some things that are above and beyond some of the state law requirements. We have a really good website in terms of information on a petition by petition basis, but we can make improvements. And I think this is where we really need to kind of take a look at what we're doing and where we are and where we'd like to go, and recognize that there are things that we can be doing better to improve the website experience. I think we do a good job, like I said, of hosting information for each petition, but there's really a lack of information on, the process itself, how folks can be involved, what a rezoning actually is, how they can, provide that outreach to staff, how they can interact with us, how they can interact with the petitioner, and really just have them understand from start to finish where they come into play in the whole process. And I think that's an area that we certainly recognize we can make some improvements on. That could be through things like FAQs on the website, just some pretty basic general questions that we know we get on a regular basis that we could just put information out there, on the forefront just to get people aware right away. Just ways that they can get involved through, contacting staff and working with each petitioner on different, projects that may be in their area. But again, I think that's an easy kind of task that we can take on. That's one kind of step in this whole process. Also, are there ways we can create some educational videos that maybe are a little bit more engaging, a little bit more, easy for folks to ascertain some of that information on the process? We did one, I think, for incoming council last year. And, that I thought was a pretty interesting way that we kind of tried to convey information about the process to new council members. And so is there a way we can do something similar for the community and just kind of talk through, what that process looks like, where they fit in, how they can stay involved, and really just try to convey that in, again, more of an engaging way that's just maybe more beneficial for folks. Also, are there opportunities for interactive mapping where folks can go online and, they have an address where they live, put that address in, see what's going on around them. You know, those are things that we'd like to explore. Of course, we have to make sure that things like that are ADA compliant. So, you know, we have to work through some of those items to make sure that we're, you know, not just providing that information, but providing it in a way that is also compliant with those, the ADA items. So I think that those couple of things, particularly the mapping, I think would be a great way if we can make that work for folks to really just be able to go online, go on our website, type in their address, see everything that's going on around them. You know, 300 feet is a great distance, but rezonings affect people within miles of that property. And so to be able to understand what's going on around you, if you didn't get that letter, but you live within a mile, you'll still have some impact probably from that rezoning. So how do we make sure that folks can, you know, be proactively aware of things that are going on within their community? Next slide, please. So one of the things that has been a little bit of a benefit from COVID has been the community meetings have all gone to somewhat of a virtual platform where folks don't have to worry about getting out to, you know, a physical location. They don't have to worry about getting, you know, maybe childcare, getting home from work at a reasonable time where they can go to these meetings that typically start around 6. And so one of the things we'd probably like to explore to keep going is, do we still ask the petitioner to stream those through, you know, one of their virtual platforms and then save those meetings somewhere on a, you know, a YouTube channel or somewhere that we can host? They wouldn't be streamed through the government channel or any of our official channels from the city side, but are there ways that we can, you know, host a link that folks can go and watch that meeting at any point? That way, if they can't make it the day of, you know, they can go back and watch it at their own convenience and provide some comments afterwards, because we know that's a challenge to get out to a meeting sometimes, again, with things like work, childcare, other needs. Not everybody can attend. So if there's a way we can work with petitioners to continue to make those meetings available through some type of virtual stream, I think that would be something that would be a benefit. You know, again, what are ways that we can help residents understand what the changes are in their neighborhoods? You know, do we find other ways to provide that information in a little bit more conducive manner? And when we talk about a rezoning going from, you know, R4 to R22, you know, folks may not understand what that means. You know, how do we maybe provide that in a little bit more easy to read summary? Are there new public engagement methods that we can use for Charlotte? I know there's some groups that already use Nextdoor through the city that let folks know about certain community items that are going on. Is that something we can work with from a rezoning standpoint to put out something each month that just lets folks know what's going on in their community through that platform? That seems to be an active one, and that may be something we can explore. Also, there's other cities that we look at that have notification systems that they have in place. Asheville's one that we just kind of started to look into. They just were awarded an NCAPA award on their community notification for development in their city. Folks can go online and look at, you know, what's going on from a development and permitting standpoint, rezoning, other permits that may be in play within their area. So that's something that I just became aware of a couple weeks ago when the awards just came out. So we just started to really dive in to see how they're using that, what they use it for. Is that something that we can learn from and maybe look at something similar that you know, can provide people a proactive way to get an email or some kind of alert that there's something going on in their community? So those are things I think we really need to sit down and work with you know, city staff to really see what the opportunities are. And again, these are things we have to explore. There may be things that we have on the table that you know, for some reason we may not be able to fully implement, but I think we just want to have everything available to us to consider. Also, relationships with our community organizations. We have a lot that are on file. We have a lot that are more active than others. What do we do with some of those communities that aren't as active, and how do we better engage them? You know, we already know the Dilworth and the Elizabeth are very active. Belmont community is an active community in the rezoning process. But what about the others that we have on file that we may not have a regular you know, relationship with, or they may not be as active or know how to be as active? How can we you know, reach out to them and create some ways that they understand how they fit into the whole process? So I think it's not just taking the ones we already work with regularly and improving those. Let's focus on the ones that that, may need some assistance to understand better and be involved more, and how can we kind of boost them and lift them up a little bit through that. So, those are some of the things, again, that we are starting to work on and explore. These are really, again, some high-level items that we'd like to continue to delve into some of the specifics with different various departments internally that we'd have to coordinate on. I know that this is something that is really important to a lot of us, including myself. I know council, I know you all are really engaged in trying to make these improvements. And one of the things that we recognize internally is, the process is set up in a way that fostered implementation of older ordinances, older plans, older policies. And as we talked about in that very first slide, we have all these great policies and new ordinances that we're working on to try and put forward. And we really need to make sure that this process is set up in a way that can facilitate those outcomes successfully. And really, we can't carry the same process that we have in place now into those new policies and into those new plans and expect everything to work well. So this is something that we understand is just as important as some of those. And we look forward to continuing to work with everybody to really try and bring this all to an improved process that works not just for those plans and policies, but also from the community standpoint.
Thank you, Dave. I really appreciate the work you guys have done on this. This has been a passion of mine to get this going, and we talk about it, and then of course we have fits and starts with the pandemic. But I agree with you. We've gotten good feedback that the online meetings are beneficial, because we've always heard people have to get childcare, they have to make arrangements to come uptown to be part of a hearing. So I'd love to see those community meetings online as well. You've mentioned in the past some of the improvements, such as those yellow signs, which in some neighborhoods sit there forever, so people aren't really aware of what's happening. The idea of having maybe a photo of the proposed project on those yellow signs would be great, or maybe even something like a QR code, which would be so awesome, to be able to just, hopefully not while you're driving, but walk up, the phone technology now, at least on iPhones, you don't have to have the app.
Right.
You just hold your camera up to that QR code, like we're seeing with menus at restaurants now, and you could get that video on what that project's about, and I guess take away some of the responsibility that's on the petitioner right now to provide that information and put it really where it should be, is with the city. And it really dovetails nicely with the progress on our comprehensive plan, because then we can let people know, how is this part of the bigger picture? How does it fit into what the comprehensive vision plan is all about? So I appreciate the work you've done on that. We have questions from everybody. We're going to start with Mr. Eggleston, and then we'll move to our council members online.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I second the chair's enthusiasm for some of the ideas there, including especially continuing to live stream the meetings. That is a hurdle for people. And I think having them in some sort of archive online where they're easily accessible not only makes it easier, because you don't have to worry about childcare or getting home from work at a certain time, but you literally don't even have to worry about being available at the time that the meeting's taking place, if it's more convenient for you to watch it that weekend or whenever. So I love that idea. One thing, and there's no one from Pam's team here, so you might not have the answer right off the top of your head, but with the neighborhood board retreats that we do, have we ever included a kind of rezoning 101 of sorts? Because if not, I think we've put a lot of neighborhoods through those twice a year, I believe we're doing. I'd love to see us do more of those. I don't know how easily that translates into a virtual platform, depending on how long it is before we can do it in person again. But doing an hour there that kind of helps people understand at least the basics of, when one of these signs goes up in your neighborhood, what do you do to engage? There's neighborhoods in my district who do these every month, and they're really familiar with the process. But I know next on our agenda is the Silver Line, and I think what we'll see with the Silver Line, it will mirror what we've seen with the Blue Line, which is that all of a sudden lots of neighborhoods who've not seen a whole lot of development and rezonings and things like that, once we get far enough along with the Silver Line that people really start making investments in those corridors, similar to what we've seen in the Blue Line, people will start rezoning, they'll start developing and investing in neighborhoods that aren't used to this process. And I've run into that, and it presents a really big challenge when someone's trying to get up to speed on this process. in the heat of the moment during a rezoning, as opposed to kind of having an understanding of it ahead of that. So the neighborhood board retreat could be a good way for us to at least get people on a more level playing field in that regard.
Yeah, I agree. I think that'd be actually a great opportunity. I know we do, through the department, we've done citizens planning academies, and we've done a rezoning kind of 101 there. So there's really, we've got those types of materials already prepared. So it's just carrying them into a venue that may be working with Pam and her group. But yeah, that's definitely an idea we'll put down and try to coordinate with them. I think that's a great opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Winston, you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, a quick comment, kind of carrying on what Mr. Eggleston was saying. A suggestion I would have for the live streams would be to create a YouTube page or whatever social media makes sense that houses all of the community meetings, and you can work with the petitioners to create a sort of public-private partnership, right? To say, hey, we're not going to come and create the videos, but you do it, and there will be a place where they can live for however long they need to live, and then you can create links where people can interact with the process right there. I think that would be quick and easy, and very, very useful for the community at large.
Agreed. I think that's a good idea as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Winston. Mr. Driggs.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. What I've experienced in my district, and this probably varies around town, is that the level of interest in getting educated about these things is low until it's immediate. So, I mean, I've had town halls and they were well attended, 100 to 150 people. Compared to the population of my district, that really doesn't begin to make a dent. So I think one of the things that's critical is that sort of early process. The district rep is critically important, and what I've done, for example, is just had an ad hoc training session where I start to identify the early respondents to a posted rezoning, the people nearby or those who are interested, and say, look, we need to talk about what the role is of residents, of citizens in this process, because we don't have a protest petition, and we need to make it clear you don't get to decide what happens there. I've had several occasions where people have said, we demand that it remain R3, and you have to get them past that. So the question is, can we, I don't know what exists already in this respect, but do we have materials that we can actually make available and start distributing, describing the role of citizens in one of these decisions? And that means the immediate neighbors who have one sort of set of concerns, and then maybe a larger population nearby who might be worried about the roads or the general area, the neighborhood, as opposed to, I'm looking over my back fence. They can't talk about the impact on the housing crisis, for example, which often comes up. And I've had to tell groups at times, if you really want to dictate what happens at that location, you need to buy that land, and then you can decide. But you have to understand our land use decision, and you have to participate in the conversation in accordance with those terms and respecting the rights of petitioners. So I guess my 2 points are, for one, trying to just educate a larger public so they're prepared is hard, because they're not going to be interested in that education until it affects them. And two, I think we need to formalize that sort of crash course so that the petitioner, who's represented by a professional, is on a more level playing field with the people who are concerned about the rezoning. And the question there is, do we have or could we create a document that we can circulate to them that they can read, and however long it takes them to read, that covers the basics of what they need to know if they want to participate? And could we have a best practices kind of guide for council members, frankly, pool our own experiences and put together a thing that says, look, this is what you should do. Collect the phone numbers. If you can, identify a spokesperson that others will allow to represent them, and just incorporate the experiences. And Dave, I wanted to acknowledge, by the way, you alluded to staff's availability, and I think we know one case like that, and I want to tell everybody, I have one right now that's controversial, and the staff have been extremely generous with their time. So 2 long meetings and all kinds of correspondence, that is available in all of these. I'm sure that anybody that wants to engage with the staff will be allowed to do so. So there isn't a deficiency like that. I think the biggest challenge for us is to get the community to take an interest and want to be educated and participate early on instead of just reacting to something they don't like. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Driggs. Mr. Newton.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation, Dave. I agree with all of the comments of my colleagues, and I also agree with Mr. Driggs's comments pertaining to the immediacy of rezonings and that interest spiking at that point. I feel like oftentimes I'll have constituents reach out to me and say after the fact that they didn't receive notice and question why they didn't receive a letter. And I want to ask you about that, Dave. So you had mentioned that the letters, petitioners are required to mail letters of notification for community meetings within a 300-foot radius? Is that
Yes.
right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Which doesn't seem like a, and I think you alluded to this, there are folks that even within a mile plus could have an interest in the meeting, and that 300-foot length doesn't sound very far. Is that something that's prescribed by state law?
Actually, that's, the 300 feet is above the state law requirements. The state law is just adjacent properties, but the council set a policy, I'm not sure what year that it was, to go beyond that to a 300-foot radius around the subject property. So that would be something that, like I said, was set as a policy, but the state law only requires you notify immediate adjacent property owners.
And that's something so it sounds like something that we could possibly review if we wanted to. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I think that sounds like it's something that certainly can be reviewed and discussed. One thing that we would probably try to caution is if we extend the radius out to, let's say a mile, that really captures a heavy amount of mailing requirements, which, then ups the cost of those mailers. So if we have another tool in place, like a way that folks can sign up for email alerts or something else that, they're able to get those no matter where they live, if it's within a mile or two, then that's maybe a more cost-effective way. So I think either scenario works out that we certainly recognize. I think there's a way that we need to maybe notice folks beyond that 300 feet, but if there's a way we can do it that's effective, cost-effective, like a notification system versus a mailing system, that might be the better alternative. But, again, I think we have to determine if that's feasible, what kind of platforms we can use, and whether or not that's something that we can implement. And if not, then we might have to look at more of a traditional mailing approach.
And I would agree. I mean, I certainly don't think that a mile is practical. At the same time, maybe it is more conducive to community engagement to extend beyond 300 feet. And I would be interested in learning more about the burden that any extension beyond 300 feet would actually place upon petitioners, because I want to be respectful in that regard. But I would love to have some follow-up and additional information on that, Dave. But once again, thank you so much for the presentation. And I would agree with everyone that the public engagement methods that we're discussing right now are certainly going to help tremendously. So thank you, and thank you, Madam Chair, for the time.
Thank you. Thank you to your cat for weighing in, too. Looks like he had an opinion on that. And Mr. Eggleston has another comment he wanted to make.
Yeah, just 2 quick things. One, I like the idea, Dave, of if we expand doing that through some digital means. It could also be a good way for us to get people connected to their neighborhood associations by saying, you live within a half mile or whatever of a rezoning. If you're interested in learning more about this, you can go to this city link, and or you can connect with the whatever neighborhood association via this website or this email address or something, and that could be a way for us to help get more citizens engaged at a neighborhood level. The other thing, a complete aside, but just comes to mind because we have faced this a couple of times in the last few months. I think part of our review on how we make this a process more effective and efficient for us, developers, community, everybody involved, is taking a hard look at how we handle ETJ rezonings, because we had one up like near Mountain Island Lake a few months back. We've got one out by the airport right now. We're dealing with citizens who can't vote for or against us as elected officials. We're dealing with a jurisdiction that's sort of ours, but sort of not. Asking the county to undertake those randomly as they come up probably isn't efficient, because it's not a process that they undertake very often. So to ask them to do something that far out of their wheelhouse probably isn't the best way to do it. But also, I think there's a feeling like from those citizens that they can't hold us accountable one way or the other. So how do they have a real voice in the process? And asking the adjacent council representative to be their voice isn't really fair to the community or to that council member. I don't have a good idea of how we make that better, but I feel like it just doesn't work. So I don't know if it's, that things would need to be annexed or what. You can't, I guess, say that someone cannot rezone their property if it's not part of the city limits. But I think that's something we got to take a look at, because it doesn't seem to be working real well right now.
Yeah, it definitely poses some challenges. I think that's something we'll have to sit down, maybe also look at how some other larger cities deal with some of that ETJ area and their process. Some do the annexation and rezoning at the same time, but some of those are also smaller jurisdictions. So I definitely think that's an area that we need to also focus on as we kind of go through this. How do we maybe serve those ETJ residents a little bit better through the process? So thank you.
I have one question, and it's probably really more a CDOT question. I don't know if Liz is still on. The method for doing the traffic impact study, are we using what's considered the best practice, or are there other methods to look at the impact of traffic on, not just to this point, not just that 300 feet circumference, but the area in general? Are we really using what is considered the state-of-the-art best practice right now?
Yeah, there are national standards for trip generation, and we subscribe to those same national standards as cities across the country do.
Okay, because I think that's something that comes up a lot in our meetings, and maybe having a new method that includes a broader picture of what the plan is will help. But I think oftentimes we look at this and we're just looking at trip generation, and this came up in the ETJ example. Was that truck traffic or is that car traffic? So that was just a question I had. Dave, did you have a comment on that?
Yeah, I think, and I agree with Liz, we do use the same metrics to analyze traffic and trip generation, but I think your question more alludes to, are we applying those metrics in a best practice, and are we looking at how other jurisdictions maybe apply that maybe differently than just looking at it on a case-by-case or subject property basis? So I think that's probably, I just want to make sure I understood your question a little bit more, and I think that's part of the research that we'd like to do, particularly with some of our peer cities, is see, we all use the same data and we all use the same numbers, but again, how are those numbers being applied, and is that something that others are doing differently than us, and where does those, where do we maybe bridge some of those gaps? I think that's probably more of what you're getting at, and I think that's an area that we'll continue to try to coordinate with CDOT on as we go through that kind of study of some of those peer cities and how they're handling information and the process in general. So.
Okay, great, thank you.
And Dave, thanks for that clarification. I'll just add a couple of comments, and you reviewed some of these points earlier when you opened with your presentation, and this gets back to the presentation that Ed McKinney gave to this committee back this summer. Again, this is a lot of work that we are working closely with the planning department on, and it's also a part of our strategic mobility plan, is really looking across the country and looking for best practices in, for example, maybe looking at that traffic impact study threshold that we have in Charlotte, because that is something that can vary across the country. And then also expanding the mitigation options that we might have available to us, so that we are considering things that are more multimodal on corridors that are appropriate and can support that. So expect more conversation in the coming year on those kinds of topics.
Thanks, Liz. Great presentation. Thanks, Dave.
One last comment.
Oh,
Uh,
Mr. Winston.
Now, just well, I think the ETJ answer would be because a consolidated government would solve all of that. But if we expand the notification kind of perimeter, I would suggest to Dave's concerns that we don't look for a mailing option, but we look to a geofencing text messaging option or other type of electronic delivery. The technology is there to be able to get a wide dissemination of information and messaging at low cost through that type of technology.
Yeah, great point, Mr. Winston.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Yes, Mr. Driggs.
Yeah, couple of quick comments. Can we use Nextdoor, or do we?
So I've seen it used by other departments. Housing Neighborhood Services use it. I've seen some others use it for different alerts, for things like trash pickup being changed and others. So that's an area, again, that as we went through this presentation, we certainly recognize that other groups are using it, and we want to see how maybe the rezoning team can use that and send out those same kind of messages to the different communities to say, hey, here are the rezonings that are active in your neighborhood this month. Please contact, whoever it may be to get more information. So that's an area we're certainly going to look into, Mr. Driggs, Councilmember Driggs.
Yeah, I think that's something definitely worth doing. The other thing is our existing practice requires notification to HOAs within a mile. Our directory of HOAs is really bad. It may be that an investment in kind of keeping that more current would help to get the word out, because they have their own communications networks then once we reach the right people. I wanted to say about the traffic, from what I've discussed on modeling and stuff like that, these national standards do not capture situations like Providence Road, where that there are 10 different developments all taking shape. You can identify a 40% increase in traffic. And we're still working from a model that's generic and anticipates the traffic is going to grow, along a certain trajectory. So we have information that would enable us to do a better job of being holistic about the 5-year outlook, say, for traffic on some of these roads. And I don't see why we can't do that in addition to whatever the conventional metrics are, because those do leave a lot out. And just quickly on ETJ, I asked Victoria Watlington if she would talk to the people on one outside of her district, and she said, sure. I still think, although it's imperfect, it's the best answer. The ability that those residents have to impact our next election is not a big concern. There aren't enough of them, frankly. So the fact that they don't vote shouldn't be the issue. We just need somebody, I believe, among us, since we are the ones who are going to be voting on it, to take some ownership of those and work on them. Easy for me to say because I'm right on the county line down here, but it's better than nothing. Thank you.
Okay, we've got two quick comments by, and then we're going to move on to our next topic. So go ahead,
I just want to
Dave
add one quick point that I didn't mention. We talked about existing technology. We also have the CLT Plus app. Is there a way that there can be some way for folks to register with that to get notifications about rezonings in their area? That's one that I've talked to our zoning committee chair about as well, and that's something we'd like to potentially explore also. Again, just leveraging resources and tools we've already got in place. So.
Okay. Taiwo, did you have a comment?
Yeah, just information that you may be aware of a community planning academy the planning department has had for many years. And Rezoning 101 is a curriculum in that academy. Now we're retooling it. And so one of the things that you may be able to do to help us when you set up your town halls between now and summer of next year is we know when that is. We can put together a Rezoning 101 class to go out there and just share that with people. Just so people know we do have a tool right now. We just need to make it more mobile.
Great. Thank you. Sorry? Okay, yeah, if everybody could mute their audio if they're not speaking. But now we're going to go back to Allison. We have our Tree Charlotte presentation up, ready to go. So Allison, do you want to take it away?
Go back a couple slides. Next slide. Thank you. So, thank you and welcome and good morning to everyone. So the tree canopy action plan will be guided by visions and values of the Charlotte 2040 comprehensive plan and will help inform what future tree policies and what regulations in order to protect the trees and the tree canopy for the future. Next slide. We came to you, I believe, in July of this year with an update on just new data that we had gotten, a new report about for the trends for Charlotte's tree canopy. Next slide. And what we're going to update you on today, we'll give you a brief overview again of the recent data analysis that was done, but talk to you about some of the other cities and what they're doing and what we might be able to implement here in Charlotte. And then most importantly, talk about tree canopy recommendations that are being integrated into the Charlotte Future 2040 plan. Next slide. So taking a moment to go through some of the data and trends. Next slide. So in this figure, you can see, I showed this last time we were here, everything in purple is our current tree canopy. As you can see, it's quite robust. Those are areas that have not changed. However, we have seen some decline. In 2012, we were at 49% tree canopy coverage, and by 2018, we were down to 45%. So we have seen some loss, and you can see that in small orange patches spread throughout the city. There are areas where we have seen some gain, but those are quite hard to see in this figure, and they're probably spottier and not as large of patches. The greatest loss that we've found has been in our residential areas. So this is in our single family zoned areas that really isn't currently regulated by the city of Charlotte. We've also found that we do not have equity in the canopy coverage, and those benefits are not being equally received throughout our community. Next slide. The greatest canopy loss has been in South Charlotte, an area where we had the greatest canopies to begin with. You've seen some substantial loss in those areas. There are some incremental gains that you've seen just through canopy development or through canopy programs and planting programs that have been implemented in the city. And those are areas for us to look at more closely to see how we might be able to replicate that and find more green in the next time we view this slide. Next slide. So did an analysis of the different zoning categories and where we've seen the greatest loss. And as I mentioned a minute ago, 65% of that loss has occurred in our single family areas. Of those, only about 20% are regulated by the city's subdivision ordinance. And the rest of those are occurring on single family lots. So through homeowner decisions by maybe expanding your property, or it could be storm damage, age of trees. If you've been in that home for a long time, the canopy may have aged and diseased or dying. So there's a great deal of change that's occurring there. That's an area that we need to look at more closely if we want to better protect the city's tree canopy. The second largest area, is in our industrial areas, followed by multifamily. Sorry, next slide. So just wanted to give you a quick snapshot to zoom in. This is taken in Myers Park, and so the areas where you see orange are the areas where we've seen canopy loss. And for the most part, with the exception of sort of an orange spot over there on the far left, most of those are associated with building permit activity. And so the homeowner will come into our county and apply for a building permit for some type of renovation, or maybe it's infill development, a new home. Those will go through the county building permit process. It's not something that the city regulates. Over on that one spot over on the left is an area of subdivision activity. So you can see for the most part, this loss is occurring through just individual homeowner decisions. Next slide. Wanted to take a moment to talk about equity in tree canopy, and we've been working with UNC Charlotte in some of these analyses. The figure on the left is looking at previously red line communities, so areas that were rated grade A that were predominantly white homeowners. Those are areas that still today, or even today, have a much greater canopy than areas that were graded D, which were predominantly African-American residents. So there's a great deal of canopy difference in those two communities, in those two areas. that is even being realized today. A recent study that came out earlier this year then translates that into an actual temperature change. And so in those grade A areas that were predominantly white communities for the purposes of homeowner loans are cooler than the areas that were rated grade D, which are warmer. And this is pretty significant. So Charlotte is has a much greater difference between these areas than our other cities nationally, and fell, I think it was the 21st largest difference in the 25 cities that were looked at in the state of North Carolina. Next slide. So here we're going to talk a little bit about what some of our other cities are doing. Next slide. So we looked at Raleigh, Austin, Atlanta, and Washington to better understand what they do in their communities and how we might be able to make some changes and improvements in Charlotte. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tim to walk through the peer cities.
Thank you, Allison, and good morning again, council members. These cities were selected based on relative size and similar urban forest characteristics to Charlotte. And next slide, please. Some of the main areas that were studied by our consultants were stormwater and trees, tree protection on private property, partnerships, and high-level takeaways and recommendations from the consultant's study on our peer cities suggested that Charlotte should consider possibly regulating areas of tree canopy that we don't currently regulate and upping mitigation and in lieu fees for tree removal processes. Additionally, it's really important that we continue to pursue support and assistance for low-income areas for maintenance and planting of tree canopy. Austin, Texas has a program that provides support to neighborhoods that are similar in that city. In 2018, Charlotte, in the landscape management group in the General Services Department, enacted a large tree assistance program. It was a pilot project that helped low-income residents in Wesley Heights address some hazard trees and problem trees on private property. Another takeaway, tree protection criteria. Many other cities have greater tree protection criteria in single-family and commercial areas, and Charlotte may want to consider that. The consultants also suggested that we consider exploring more flexibility in tree save areas. If there's existing large, high-quality trees and high-quality forest areas, also passive use in these tree save areas, so residents can access tree canopy. And also many other cities have advocacy type groups that really push for greater tree policies and support, and that's an area where Charlotte needs a community group that is a very advocate, active, Friends of the Forest type group. So, next slide, please. And moving on to the policies, and we can move on to the next slide. Some results from our public survey process, our public engagement process for TCAP that ran from September through October 12th. About 2,400 respondents, the majority of responses were from white folks and college educated. We're still analyzing this. Our consultants are still working on that. You can look at the map image. The darker red and orange areas are clusters of higher areas of responses grouped together. The survey was an 8-question survey with some supporting videos that gave more context to each question. We had many comments provided, just general comments written in at the end of the survey, and our consultant and staff are still working together to boil this down and summarize. Next slide, please. So some of the major results we got from the survey, starting on the left of the screen, were residents aware that Charlotte had a 50 by 50 tree canopy goal? The majority of respondents, 47%, said no. Also, a large portion said yes, so almost half and half. A lower percentage heard of it, but weren't really sure what it meant. So it's very interesting. Suggests there may be some more work we need to do in outreach and awareness and knowledge base. Moving to the top right for question 2, are you pleased with the amount of tree canopy in your neighborhood? 50% said yes. 44% said we need more trees. 3% said too many trees, and 3% had another response. So in the bottom right here, are you pleased with the amount of tree canopy citywide? Overwhelmingly, 82% said we need more tree canopy. Next slide, please. This one's a busy one, so I'll start on the left. These are some of the major themes that have been summarized through the public survey and the comments that were provided by respondents. From top to bottom, their knowledge and awareness is needed at a higher level. Residents have seen that canopy is aging. They've seen trees falling. They've seen trees being removed in higher numbers due to storm damage. They think that maintenance support may be inadequate or is inadequate. There's concern over canopy loss due to development. There's a great need to preserve more canopy, and respondents want the city and partners to think about walkability and overall quality of life when developing and implementing tree canopy policies. So on the lower right, questions 3, 5, and 7, starting where that 81% red blob is. What's the most important thing we can do to grow and sustain tree canopy? The number one thing, as it usually is to provide more maintenance. There's a real concern out there about maintenance and care of our existing canopy. Question 5, 78% believe that we need more tree preservation. That's typically one of the highest priorities among tree issues for folks. Tree planting is very important, as you can see in the following question, number 7. For underserved neighborhoods, the belief is there's more tree planting needed there as well. So just some general initial results from our public survey. We can move on to the next slide. So the executive summary of the comprehensive plan, which was issued, has some parts in it that are placeholders. A lot of the work in the tree canopy action plan is still ongoing. We're working with our stakeholders still, and we have provided numerous policy ideas, objectives, goals, programs for the full comprehensive first plan draft coming out on October 31st. The executive summary has some placeholder items. Over the next couple slides, we'll see some of the actual draft policy ideas. And we can move on to the next slide. So anywhere you see green text, that represents feedback and support for policy ideas that came out of the Tree Canopy Action Plan. Stakeholder group based on the public survey comments, our stakeholder comments. So goal number 1, we're just going to touch on a couple examples of tree canopy policies for a couple different goals. This isn't an extensive list. It's just an example of a handful. So we added comfortable tree-shaded 10-minute walk, bike, or transit trip by 2040. That suggests that tree canopy can provide a comfortable, healthy walk, which is a core component of the comprehensive plan, the 10-minute. The objective is ensure that on those walks, it's tree shaded, safe, and trees are used as tools for barriers to reduce air pollution, sound, and other quality of life issues like temperature reduction. It's a high level objective, and we'll talk about some mid and lower level policy ideas over the next couple slides. Okay, next slide. Neighborhood diversity and inclusion. We want to ensure that housing access, if there's incentives and newer approaches to that, that there isn't any unintentional loss of tree canopy that results in a lower quality of life from an environmental perspective. I just wanted to mention that's something we're working on to ensure that tree canopy provides flexible, options for development, but also provides equal, equitable benefits across all areas of Charlotte. Okay, next slide. So this is a busy one, the integrated natural and built environment. It's one of the main focus areas for tree canopy policies in the comprehensive plan. To the actual goal statement, the stakeholders supported adding a sustainable city infrastructure element. That goal statement already included tree canopy and other natural resources type elements. It was important to stakeholders, residents, and staff to think about sustainability in trees as an asset to infrastructure. And moving on to the 4 bulleted items. It's important, as Allison mentioned earlier, we're seeing a lot of canopy loss in residential areas, namely single family, non-subdivision areas. So one of the key policy ideas is to decrease the amount of loss that's taking place there. The second bullet, increase the amount of developments that utilize clustered residential and low-impact design, thereby allowing for more preservation of trees. A third bullet is more specifically regulatory, is removing tree save exemptions for development areas that currently do not have to comply with that requirement, and provide innovative and flexible mitigation options. Get more canopy support in these areas, but supporting the dense development, but providing flexible mitigation options for development customers when they are building those areas. The last bullet is to protect trees of a certain size and health on public and private property through a number of changes in regulatory and administrative practices, provide incentives and education. This both is regulatory and non-regulatory focused. Okay, so moving on, for the sake of time, next slide, please. I think we have 4 slides that touch on some place type characteristics for urban forestry. I might just talk about 2 to ensure we have time for everything else we want to get to today. So this is another busy slide, apologies for that, but this represents some of the key characteristics we're proposing for place types, tree canopy characteristics. Neighborhood 1 is the most important area because it's about 58% of all city land, and this is based on some rough initial place type mapping. Of course, it won't be mapped till later on next calendar year, but right now about 60+% of our canopy, let me double check that number real quick, is on single family areas, 65%. So it's really important that we be very mindful in these areas about canopy losses and gains, and the characteristics in those green bulleted items get to the heart of that concern. It's important that we approach tree canopy in a multifaceted strategy here, not just street trees, but private property trees, open space areas. We want to make sure that 90% of all planting sites in the second bullet there have a tree in it. So that would support probably greater resources for street tree planting programs the city has in place. The third bullet gets to a goal to preserve more trees on private land for tree canopy. There should be enough area provided for sustainable tree canopy growth on private property, or areas that aren't built upon, I should say. The bottom bullet, you'll see in the next slide as well, is a suggested tree canopy coverage goal. It's important that we consider canopy goals that are scalable, both citywide, regionally, and neighborhood specific to provide the benefits equitably to everyone in Charlotte. And can we skip to the next slide, please, just to focus on great, thank you. A more dense area. This is only about 2% of all city land, regional activity centers. And the focus here is going to be on street trees and pedestrian pathways where density is really high here. The existing canopy and the future canopy is going to be very concentrated in street tree areas or pedestrian areas. So we want to make sure we have different types of regulatory incentives and flexible options to ensure that the development of these areas provide growth opportunities for trees. And the last bullet on the bottom there, tree canopy coverage is suggested to range between 15 to 25%, and 90% of all street tree planting sites will have trees in them. Right now, there's about 17% tree canopy coverage in regional activity centers. So it's an area we know isn't going to be very robust ever with tree canopy. It's only 2% of the city land, but we want to make sure we do get what we can while having a great balance there. And so with that, I think it's time for me to turn it back over to Allison for next steps.
Thanks, Tim. Next slide. Next. There we go. Thank you. So one of the questions that Tim and I get asked a lot when we are presenting is, what is the city going to do about its 50 by 50 goal? And at this point, we're not recommending a new goal, and we're not recommending changing that goal. Right now, the focus is making sure that the tree canopy is fully integrated into the goals, priorities, and policies in the comprehensive plan. And some of the areas that we've heard from our stakeholders and from the community include reducing loss in the residential areas, as we've touched on a number of times, making sure there's better options for trees in urban areas. Right now, that's quite a challenge, and it's important to concentrate density, for example, along our transit corridors. And so trees may look differently there. We may need to think about canopy differently there. We also want to make sure we have proactive tree care and planting in our underserved neighborhoods. So those are some of the policies that are being developed right now as part of the comprehensive plan. We want to make sure that we're talking to the community and to our stakeholders about what these new tools we would use to protect and enhance the canopy and the Unified Development Ordinance. So we'll be working with our stakeholder group and our Ordinance Advisory Committee on these. And it's things like, what do we do about that 65% of the city that isn't regulated? What sort of changes might occur there? We've heard from some community members that aren't in favor of those types of regulations, and some are. So those are big community conversation that impacts a great deal of the city of Charlotte. As Tim showed, we've begun to establish canopy goals by place type, and we hope to partner with UNC Charlotte to model those and see what our canopy coverage could be as next year we start to talk about mapping those place types in Charlotte. Ultimately, we expect this will result in an update to the Urban Forest Master Plan. And so I imagine that we'll begin working on that next year as we work through some of these policies and ordinance discussions next year, and expect to bring something back to council for adoption probably in 2022, I would imagine, but work will begin on the Urban Forest Master Plan starting next year as an update. And I'll end there. I know we're short on time, and I want to make sure that we need time for any questions you all may have.
Thank you, Tim and Allison. It's an interesting presentation because as we think about how fast Charlotte is growing, I'm glad to hear that you're talking about working with UNCC to model and project canopy goals, because we have that data now. We know where the growth is going and what kind of growth, more or less, so you can extrapolate that and say, then 10 years out, this is the canopy loss that will happen in those areas, and therefore it allows us to really then figure out where's the opportunity to replace that canopy. So to that point, remind me again, with our current policy, if you're a single-family homeowner and you want to build a new house and you've got 5 trees on your property that you're taking down, is the offset that you just have to provide 5 trees somewhere else, or how does it work right now?
Right now, in that scenario, which is infill type development scenario, there is no requirement to replant trees. There may be, unless it's a historic district, there may be some requirements there, but if it's just an individual lot that's being redeveloped, there is no requirement to replant trees.
Okay. So that's I just drove past a lot yesterday, and I won't throw them under the bus, but it was a small lot 5 minutes from Uptown, and they had 5 or 6 massive trees on the lot that have been sheared, basically. It's heartbreaking to see, and I didn't know if they needed to replace those or whatnot, but even if you said, we're gonna plant 6 trees somewhere else, that doesn't compare to the canopy that was lost from those trees. They were big, probably 100-year-old trees. So I wonder what tools we have available to us right now to have some kind of an offset program, or do we need to go to the General Assembly for that to be able to replant those trees somewhere else if the homeowner's going to take down trees? Because to your point, you just can't replace that, and that's where a lot of it is happening, and you can't say that a sapling is going to provide anywhere close to the canopy that a 100-year-old or a 50-year-old tree provided. So what tools do we have right now to address that loss in single-family on single-family plots?
Well,
or what tools could we have without having to go to the General Assembly?
Based on the results from our peer city analysis, it's something we're exploring right now, but worth considering is possibly regulating somehow trees on those types of properties. And a balanced approach, of course, because we want density in some places. We want to preserve trees, but also we don't want to reduce the ability to develop and for property rights to have flexibility to do, property owners to do what they want. So I could see some type of preservation requirement that has a appropriate level of flexibility for removal, but also a mitigation requirement that could support a tree planting program. The regulatory approach could be focused as much on preservation and replanting. Tree canopy is a fluid thing. It's important to preserve trees, but it's not static. And another tool is to increase support for community programs that plant trees on private property and maintenance of those trees. Aging canopy is contributing to a lot of decline on those sites as well. And the better you take care of a tree throughout its lifetime, the longer it's going to live, the more benefits it's going to provide. So I think it's a blend of those types of tools and strategies. Allison, I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that.
The only thing I would say is just that it's my understanding, of course, I'd defer to our attorneys on this, but it's my understanding that the power of regulating that resides at the city, that we have the authority to regulate those trees. So it's a city decision.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Eggleston has a question.
Thank you. Two quick things. Quickly, and I know we've already incorporated this into some of our planning going forward, but I hope we'll continue to find ways. There's going to be places, particularly in commercial developments, where we're not going to get replacement trees, or we're not going to get replacement trees that actually are in even a fraction of the benefits of the tree that was maybe taken down. So I hope we'll continue to push to find ways to encourage, particularly in those commercial developments, but even in residential developments, things like green and living roof options. And they obviously don't provide all the benefits of a tree, but they provide many of them. So the other thing is, you said you're not recommending a change in goal, but, and I don't remember now, time's all run together, but I don't know if it's a year ago or 18 months ago or what, but at some point we already kind of redefined what the 50 by 50 means and said, well, now 50 by 50 means we're going to try to achieve these other things, not just literally a 50% canopy by 2050. But given the influx of people moving to our community, the amount of not just rezonings, but by right developments that are going on where people are taking 50 and 100 acre tracts that are just forested land to build the residential housing that is needed to support all the people moving in or house all the people moving into our community. I do think we've got to be more upfront with the community about the 50 by 50. People still assume that means a 50% canopy by 2050. If there is a way to achieve that, I would love to hear it. I assume there's not. So I think we need to be as forthright as we can be about the fact that for whatever reasons, we will not be able to achieve that if that's the case, and what we are doing in lieu of that to take very seriously the loss of canopy in this community, because the combination of trees being cut down and the ones that, like the chair mentioned, are 100 years old and reaching the end of their, what our reasonable expectation for their lifespan should be, it's going to be hard to increase it at all. And your first slide, I think, showed that we've lost something like 6% just in the last couple of years. So I do hope we don't wait until 2049 to fully acknowledge that we're not going to hit a 2050 goal, but that we acknowledge that when we're certain that we won't, and figure out what the new strategy and goals are that we can be honest with the community about and ask for their help in achieving.
Yeah, if I could just comment on that. This is a very pivotal time in the city of Charlotte, as we're developing the first comprehensive plan for growth in 45 years. And so I think there's a lot of priorities that we've discussed with the community, with you all, about what we want Charlotte to look like in the future. And trees are important, as well as things like, affordable housing and equity and a number of other things that we've heard from the community members on. So right now, I think it would be challenging to be able to model that, because we haven't, completed mapping the different place types, as well as the zoning districts and the regulations therein. And so I think when we get a little further along in that process, then we'll be able to start doing those modeling efforts, hopefully in partnership with UNC Charlotte, in order to really be able to say that. And I think those questions will have more clarity to answer those as we update the urban forest master plan.
Thank you. Thanks, Tim and Allison. Oh, I'm sorry. We do have two more comments from committee members, and then just doing a time check. We're just a few minutes behind here for our next topic, so we want to leave enough time for that. But Mr. Driggs and Mr. Winston also have questions or comments. So, Mr. Driggs?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I'd just like to comment, this business where when it's our turn to talk, we're in a hurry, is not very helpful for council members, for committee members. We need to be able to participate.
It's just a time check so that we can be aware that we have
I know,
another
but then
topic.
we should program the meeting in such a way that there's enough time for us to say what we want to say and not feel that we need to rush all the time. I don't think that the presentations were that hurried, frankly.
Apologies. We added another half hour onto this one, but maybe we're going to have to schedule them more frequently.
I just want to strongly echo what Mr. Eggleston said, and we need to recognize that what we're talking about here has pretty massive commercial and economic implications, and that ties into this 50 by 50 concept. What we're going to end up with is not just some outcome where suddenly it's 30. We're going to end up making choices, difficult choices about what priority we want to assign to trees versus the other goals that we have. Our 2040 plan actually abolishes single-family zoning. And I just see these conflicts taking shape. I mean, conflicts in the sense of a need to prioritize. I think we have the data from what we were just told to start. We were told about percentages and coverages in those areas and things like that. We have what we need to start identifying the trade-offs between different solutions concerning trees and the other aspects of the 2040 plan. So this is a dynamic conversation. This is not just a one-time update in 2 years or 3 years. This is a schedule of choices where we say, look, if we want to get to 40% by 2050, this is what it's going to take. If we want to get to 45, this is what it's going to take. And those are big. This is not a peripheral issue by any means. Trees are important on the one hand, and on the other hand, the implication of imposing all kinds of requirements on development related to trees are also substantial, as I'm sure we'll hear from the developer community. So I would just like to see the conversation move in the direction of identifying how we make these choices and what the implications are of different things we might decide to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Driggs. Mr. Winston.
Excuse me. I agree with Mr. Driggs about the setup of meetings. I hope as a council, this is something that we can talk about in January in a more general sense. I have two questions or comments. The low-income assistance program, I feel like for the past 2 budget cycles, I have asked for this to be turned into a citywide policy. And I feel like there has been other support for that from my other colleagues. So I'd like to know where in the process that is, or if we are working on that. And secondly, what is the correlation between our tree canopy or tree canopies in general and parking requirements? I personally would like to see the strip model die because of the oceans of asphalt and cement. But we have to develop for business and commerce and residential for that matter. How are we incentivizing tree canopy plus bike and pedestrian development over personal vehicle infrastructure development?
So I can add to that. Right now, regulatory requirements for every surface parking lot, you have to have every space within 40 feet of a tree. There's usually a tree island in the middle of the lot. But to your point, Councilmember Winston, we're talking with stakeholders about creative, incentivized options to, I'm not sure we're talking about reducing parking, but to better coverage parking.
Well, I'm saying, how do we put more trees in developments and make business and commerce, commercial areas more relevant for, pedestrian and biking, right? Because people still have to get there, right? So how do we replace these oceans of parking lots, which often sit empty, with things like trees?
That's a good idea. We do have some draft policy ideas to support when a bike facility is implemented. I'm not sure I can speak to how to incentivize reduction of the parking area. We're looking at developing innovative options and flexible options for development customers when they do construct a parking area, to have flexibility in how you shape it to better support the needs of future development. So it could be, for comparison to a traditional parking lot where there's a tree island every 5 or 10 spaces, there'd be more groupings of trees, or a different approach to designing that parking lot to allow for more canopy cover. But I can talk to my associates in the zoning area and see where we are with developing an approach to flexible parking and reducing parking for supporting pedestrian and bicycle areas.
If I could just add to that, I think just with the comprehensive plan, Charlotte Moves, and other strategic mobility plan, there are a lot of discussions about the importance of a multimodal facility there and less dependent on cars and parking. You saw in our TOD ordinance, we had parking maximums instead of parking minimums. And so that sort of mindset and thinking about our city will be carried forward in the comprehensive plan as well as in the UDO.
Thank you. And if we can, any kind of input on the low income tree assistance program that was piloted in Wesley Heights. Is there any progress on expanding that citywide?
Councilmember Winston, yeah, I will check with my colleagues in General Services and Landscape Management Group, but it's my understanding they've been working on a strategic funding request to approach that. So it is citywide. There's some innovative ideas we're discussing to not just look at a funding request to council, but also maybe corporate or community sponsorship of that, maybe with development customers. But I can circle up with the City Arborist Group and follow up with an update to you and this committee with where we're at with that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, if there's no more questions, we'll move on. Thank you, Tim and Allison, for the presentation and for everybody's comments and questions. The third area that we're going to go on to is the Silver Line TOD, and John Lewis is here today to talk to us about that. So why don't we go ahead? Mr. Lewis. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm looking at John Howard.
Two Johns. Okay. Yeah.
John Howard is here. John Lewis is online. Who's presenting today for us?
Madam Chair.
Oh, yes. Hi, John.
Hi, I'm going to start off and then turn the details of the presentation over to John Howard, who's in the room with you today, if that's all right with the committee.
Great, thank you.
Great. So we're here today to give you an update on the Silver Line Transit-Oriented Development Study. But I wanted to take a moment to make sure that there's a clear understanding that while we are talking about the TOD study today, this is part of an integrated program of separately funded, separately staffed projects that are all in relation to the Silver Line, but have a different twist to it. We've been before the committee to give you an overview of the Silver Line design, development, engineering project, which we're in just concluding our second phase of public outreach. But today, we wanted to give you an overview of the transit-oriented development side, and then perhaps later come back to the committee to talk about our rail trail study, which is as important as the other three. But once again, these are integrated but different studies within the Silver Line program. Each has their own funding source, and the purpose of the TOD study is to integrate land use and transportation planning earlier in the process than what we've done typically in the past. The rail trail study, as I mentioned, is a high-level planning effort to develop a contiguous pedestrian and bike network along the Silver Line corridor. Next slide, please. So the TOD planning effort is a unique opportunity to address lessons learned from the Blue Line projects. I want to acknowledge now that there were some missed opportunities related particularly to equity issues such as displacement related to private development and the lack of planning for affordable housing in the South Corridor of the Blue Line and even to a certain extent the Blue Line extension. And so we wanted to take a different path with the Silver Line to ensure that we weave in the lessons learned from the Blue Line projects and make sure that we not only meet the mobility goals of this project, but also the broader policy goals as outlined by Council. The TOD study will specifically address those topical areas, as well as developing a TOD education strategy for the public and project partners. This is particularly important when talking about equity, development, and community character. Next slide, please. So we're starting even earlier with the transit-oriented development and station area planning discussions than we typically would have in the Blue Line or Blue Line extension. We are integrating this with our station location and design decisions. Like the Blue Line and Blue Line extension, we have an interdepartmental team, but we've also expanded those partnerships geographically beyond just the city of Charlotte and expanded the focus areas for TOD planning to include open space and affordable housing. And so what we wanted to do, in essence with this, is to get out a little earlier in the process to make sure that we brought in and met not only the mobility needs of how do we move, develop, design, develop, engineer, and construct the Silver Line, but also how do we go beyond just meeting the mobility needs of citizens along that corridor to ensure that we're meeting the broader goals of housing, transit-oriented development, economic development, and equity along with this important investment. And so with that, I'm going to turn over the presentation to John Howard, and he'll get into the details and results of the study thus far. Thank you, Madam Chair. And if there are any questions at the end of the presentation, we'd be happy to engage.
Thanks, John.
All right. Thank you. Good morning. Next slide, please. And let's go 2 more slides. Oh, there we are. So I wanted to give kind of a high-level overview of the goals of the study itself. And then, as Mr. Lewis said, I'll get more into the details of the scope and then deliverables of what the plan will contain at the end of the presentation. So there are 3 overarching questions that we're asking about this particular study. One is, what kind of place do we want to be in terms of this 26 miles of light rail corridor? There are lots of different areas, lots of different communities. We're traversing 3 counties now, Gaston County, Mecklenburg, and potentially Union County. So we need to really identify what the station area types are that fits these different contexts, and also develop these detailed station area plans for each location. Second is, how ready is the corridor for TOD? That is, what kind of market potential exists along these different station areas, such a diverse set of towns and places within the city of Charlotte. And looking at land use, what types of land uses are most appropriate in each location? And as to the point about affordable housing, we'll have an assessment of that in terms of what's existing now, and also how we can leverage strategies to get more affordable housing along the Silver Line. And third, what do we need to do to make access successful for transit and for TOD? Street connections, sidewalks, of course, and overall connectivity, getting folks to and from the station areas is critical. So we'll outline important connections to and from these station areas. Next slide, please. So this is the broader scope, which covers basically 4 topical areas. One is community engagement and education. To Mr. Councilman Eggleston's point earlier, it's important for people to understand what is transit-oriented development and what is it not, and how does it respond to different characteristics of different places along the corridor. And also zoning is going to be an important topic, which we have in our toolkit. Monica Holmes recently just updated the TOD district. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about what TOD means. And it may not be a one-size-fits-all for other jurisdictions, but we'll talk to them about how TOD could fit their jurisdictions in Matthews, Indian Trail, Stallings, and Belmont and Gaston County. And again, we'll have a TOD readiness or market analysis component. We'll also have a station area planning component, and again, the implementation strategy component as well. Next slide, please. So building TOD is more than just planning a transit system to get our residents from one point to another. We see this being a community building initiative where we are looking at more inclusivity, more equity in terms of land use, protecting small businesses where we can, again, including affordable housing. We're also looking at land use and public open space. So our team reflects the fact that we're looking at all these different types of land use implications within our study team. So we look forward to having this more robust conversation about how do we make sure that the Silver Line can adapt to even existing plans in other jurisdictions. So we have to make sure that we understand this is not just about Charlotte, but it's also about our neighbors to our east and to our west. Next slide, please. So again, the 4 overarching areas, again, are improving mobility and access. Again, having the right kinds of land uses around our station areas. Again, not all will be the same. All will have different market potential, so we'll look at that in more detail. And enhancing community design and improving equity across the city. So all of these components together, we believe, will help improve the goals to create a more equitable city in our city and in our region. Next slide, please. So just getting down to more detail about those 4 topical areas, we want to enhance connectivity so that people can have a good and safe walking environment, bicycle environment, and a driving environment getting to and from these stations, and make sure that they're integrated in those context areas. And also to encourage transit supportive development. Ideally, you want to have a mix of complementary land uses, also well-integrated land uses without too many barriers between them, and all within a easy walking distance, typically a half mile around the station area. And also we want to enhance community identity. We want to use good urban design principles to make sure that these station areas are safe and attractive, and again, walkable, enjoyable places to live and to work. And that leads up to equity and expanding opportunities. We want to make sure that we optimize access to transit to enhance economic mobility, that's access to jobs, access to education, and again, include more affordable housing to have a more diverse station area places along the corridor, and again, to meet goals that we have within the city, to make sure that we're following that, and we're putting our best foot forward, if you will, to look proactively about affordable housing placement. Next slide, please. I know we focus a lot about affordable housing, but we also want to make sure that this is always an all-inclusive project. We want to have access for all. And we're also looking at not just attracting new business, but also how can we retain existing small businesses along the corridor and in these station areas. Again, looking at the equity lens, this is very important to make sure that we're looking at all levels of users and people who work and enjoy these places along the 26 miles of light rail corridor. Next slide, please. So one deliverable, again, is the market assessment. And again, that's looking at the TOD potential in these station areas. and also identify places where we can have that high-impact catalytic type TOD station area, such as the Bojangles Arena area and others along the corridor. And again, to develop corridor preservation strategies to get to the place of ensuring that we have things like affordable housing in these station areas. We want to make sure that we can identify the right types of area or land dimensions and amount that can actually support housing in a meaningful way. So that's going to be another item that we'll have within the plan deliverables. Next slide, please. Also, well, like Mr. Lewis said, we're working in conjunction with the Silver Line design team and helping to analyze station locations and the alignment. We do have TOD metrics in that analysis and understand that there will be trade-offs deciding which alignment will be the preferred and final LPA. But we are considering TOD impact as part of that analysis. And again, we're going to create station area plans in detail for 7 station areas, as well as have a updated station area topology manual, and also having the tools ready for other jurisdictions who are kind of new to this discussion in terms of light rail, and make sure that they have the right education and tools for their jurisdictions as well. Next slide, please. So again, about affordable housing, we'll have an assessment, again, of what's occurring. That's naturally occurring affordable housing, as well as other affordable housing types. And again, we have a diverse team on our consultant side and within the City of Charlotte itself. Housing and Neighborhood Services is part of our project management team. So we've had some discussions already about this topic. Pre-COVID, we had a number of stakeholder meetings with different development groups, and one was an local affordable housing stakeholder meeting at the Powerhouse. And we just wanted to get feedback from them about how they could be involved in this process. So they will be stakeholders along this study timeline as well. And again, we'll have more information about how that would look in the demonstration areas, about where we think we could have potential for either joint development or affordable housing projects. Next slide, please. Very important is to identify key capital investments, that being important street connections, important infrastructure improvements to make these stations really successful. It won't have a cost analysis with that. This is more of a high-level analysis of what will it really take to make sure that we get the right kind of ridership and access from the surrounding area around the station to make sure that we have a vibrant and robust station area around these locations. One thing we don't want to have are stations that people can't access or they can't see. So we want to make sure that we have those critical connections outlined in the plan. Next slide, please. Next slide again. So I'll talk a little bit about our outreach efforts to date. We want to make sure that we leverage all of the other plans going on in our community. That includes the 2040 Comprehensive Plan, the Connect Beyond Regional Transit Plan, and other local planning efforts outside of maybe the City of Charlotte to make sure that we are connecting with all the other efforts that are going on because they are all interrelated on some level. Next slide, please. And this is just an illustration to show that we have been, again, partnering with our city partners, of course, the airport being one, and economic development, NC, DOT, Mecklenburg County Park and Rec, to make sure we have all the right voices around the table, as well as our partners to our east and west in Gaston County and Matthews and Union County. And again, talking with the development community and getting their feedback as well. And we have other plans in the future for more outreach with the Urban Land Institute and others as they come along. Next slide, please. Prior to the round 2 public engagement, we actually had a series of neighborhood meetings where we all met virtually online. That was primarily led by the design team, but the TOD team was also involved because we did have questions about transit-oriented development in those, and that'll be ongoing. Those will not be one-off meetings. We'll have those continue on throughout the life of this study. And again, we'll leverage any kind of partnership that we can find to help get the word out about this project, to make sure that nobody is left behind and not understanding what the project is. Next slide, please. And again, this slide just illustrates that there are different ways to approach outreach. And even though meeting virtually is not our standard or ideal sometimes, it has allowed us to do things like have creative meeting formats, or maybe in-person pop-ups where we can practice social distancing. But we're trying everything we can to have good visualizations, make sure that our maps are easy to read and clear. And again, each area has different levels of priorities and goals. So it's making sure that we're able to respond to those has been beneficial in this virtual meeting format. And we'll continue to research and improve upon what we've done so far. But I think with the public meetings that we've had to date, we've been pretty successful in reaching maybe a larger group of people than before we're meeting in person. Next slide, please. So just to kind of summarize some of our work to date, we did have a virtual 8-day urban design workshop this spring. We've also developed some preliminary TOD scenarios for the alignment. Again, we've supplied the design team with the TOD metrics for the alignment decision-making process. We are wrapping up a corridor-wide existing conditions assessment and also an affordable housing assessment within the existing conditions report. So that's the work that we've completed to date. And just some key findings that we've experienced along the way. Obviously, again, we have a very long 26-mile stretch of corridor with different types of characters along the way. And there's a strong desire across the board to look at equity and affordable housing again, and the need to preserve, as best we can, small business and affordable housing communities. And also a very strong support for the rail trail and that level of ped bike connections along the 26 miles. And one thing we wanted to also highlight in these discussions is it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. People, I think, point to South End. They point to maybe the NoDa Arts District as being what we like to see along the entire alignment, but that's not quite accurate. Each one has their own context. Each one has their own level of maturity. What fits, in uptown Charlotte or around its borders may not work well in Belmont, may not work well in Matthews, Stallings, and Indian Trail. So understanding that we want to be very intentional up front, that what you see that's happening on the urban fringe of Charlotte may not work as well in the more suburban areas further out. And another key finding is there will be many infrastructure challenges along the corridor. So again, making these stations accessible and safe is going to be a challenge, but we believe that we have some ideas to make that happen. And also we know that transit investment can create some significant TOD in certain areas. So we'll talk more about that as we continue on with the planning effort. Next slide, please. Next slide. Oh, there we go. So a schedule and next steps to date. The orange arrow, that's our, hopefully that will be the decision-making point for the final LPA that goes to the MTC in March. After that, the TOD team will start diving into the station area planning work after we get the alignment finalized. And again, we'll still keep building on the station area planning work from that point on until the end of the project. And again, the final plan should be wrapped up either by the end of 2021 or early 2022. And with that, that's the end of my presentation. And I'll open it up for questions. Ms. Isolt?
Thank you, John. Start with Mr. Eggleston.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Couple things. One, I hope as we're putting some of this information out, I think we do this on a lot of our presentations or information sheets or whatever. I hope we're putting a glossary at the front or back of these things so that, because, you know, certainly I think anybody who cares enough to watch these meetings or look this stuff up online would know what TOD is, but might not know what MTC is, LPA is, some of the other acronyms we use. So I hope we're making this digestible for Joe citizen that might want to log in and take a look at it. I'm glad that there is, and I wholeheartedly agree, the acknowledgement that each of these areas are very unique and that they're not going to be Southend, they're not going to be NODA, they're going to be their own thing. And there are things that I look at the NODA corridor or the Blue Line extension and would love to see us emulate, particularly all of the art that's popped up along there. Some of it as part of this project, some of it as part of the development that this project has spurred, or the Blue Line project has spurred. But I think that there are things too, and I really appreciate that there's acknowledgement in this presentation of the need to preserve naturally occurring affordable housing, and not only housing, residential preservation, but also business preservation. And how do we help some of these businesses that are here in these corridors that might not be as considered as high value right now? How do we help them stay around and benefit from the light rail as opposed to be a victim of the light rail? Because I can tell you through all parts of the Blue Line, the first phase and the second, there were a lot of businesses who were the victim of the success of our transit corridor and are not there any longer. And those are the places that made NODA unique. And there's still a lot of great things in NODA, but there was a lot of great things that were lost, and the same holds true for Southend. So I hope that there are really robust strategies around figuring out how to minimize the displacement, both residential and commercial, that these things cause. I know some of that is inevitable, but I hope we have learned some of those lessons from the Blue Line and can see better results in those areas on the Silver Line. But obviously super excited about this project and appreciate the update.
Thank you. Mr. Newton.
Mrs. Chair, so I appreciate the presentation as well, and I really appreciate the extensive community outreach in this process. I think that's so important. I was so impressed by the community meetings. So each phased community meeting, I attended the ones around Briar Creek and then down towards Matthews. And I know that we had a lot of community input. I would imagine that in every area there is an organization that is maybe going the extra yard, researching the alignments even more, and providing additional input. And to that end, I just want to make a plug for Monroe Road Advocates. I know that they have been extensively involved, particularly in that Briar Creek down to Matthews corridor, and just wanted to make sure that as we move forward with community input, this conversation, that their input isn't forgotten either. I know that they've reached out to you, Mr. Lewis. They've reached out to Mr. Mock and others. So just wanted to also support their input and making sure that they're a part of this process. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Newton, Councilman, I think you are bringing up an important point. I think right now, most of the community discussions and conversations have been along the lines of how will the design and placement of the alignment impact these communities. And so we are taking in that input, but at the same time, we also want their proactive input about what the end product looks like through this TOD study. And so it's a lot of education about what the difference is between the multiple studies, but also getting them to understand and to participate in the process beyond just where the stations, where the alignments, but help us proactively plan for the future. So I hear you on that, and we will make sure that we keep them plugged in.
Thank you, Mr. Newton. Mr. Winston.
Thank you. So land, Mr. Lewis probably knows where I'm going with this, but land use around transit and transportation has been utilized to create, promote, and sustain segregation and inequality. This isn't specific to Charlotte, although it is endemic to Charlotte. We have to go way beyond just looking at developing affordable housing strategies along the Silver Line alignment. It is good that we are doing this TOD deep dive. While I'm not sure of the sequencing, should this happen concurrently or after, I think we need an entity that is considering how to develop, suggest, and implement restorative land use, property acquisition, and development policies along the Silver Line alignment in our TOD zones. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Winston. That's a good point. And John, maybe you can touch on that a little bit. At what point can we use federal funds to purchase land for the purpose of, to include affordable housing, as part of the plan?
So this really is a new area that we're embarking upon. We do have permission from the Federal Transit Administration to begin early acquisition of right-of-way. And we have acquired multiple pieces of property to protect the right-of-way so that we can continue with the project. But there are some areas of gray in this in terms of what we are protecting in order to develop the transportation project versus what we may or may not be able to acquire for other policy purposes. So in this case, we're still waiting on a decision on whether or not we can use transportation funds to meet housing goals directly. So can I acquire property not necessarily for the alignment or the station, but for future development? If it's associated with a station, we have some flexibility. But if it's in between stations, as an example, that is not specific to our station, that's where we're in a bit of a gray area. And so what we wanted to do with this is bring together a diverse group of experts and discuss the potential for leveraging other funds to meet these goals. And so we have a good deal of flexibility in and around the stations, but we lose that flexibility as we broaden out into the overall corridor. So this is an opportunity for us to bring other groups, private and public, together to say this is what we can accomplish at the stations, but how do we leverage that in areas that are outside our control? And so that will be one of the things that we are discussing as we are moving this study forward.
Yeah, that's great. It'll be interesting to find out if we can do anything or maybe set a new standard for being able to incorporate transportation and affordable housing goals. Does anyone else have any questions? Mr. Driggs, do you have any questions for Mr. Lewis or Mr. Howard?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, that's it. And we're actually a minute short, so apologies to the committee and for everybody online that, with the trying to balance getting all of this information in and rushing people's comments. It's not my intention. We have so much. I do feel like this is probably one of our busiest committees aside from Safe Communities. And I don't, that's something we'll have to talk about if we find a need to go to more than once a month with our meetings. We extended this one an extra half hour to try to get everything in. And everybody's comments are important because this is really about building the city that we want to see and that's equitable for the next few generations. So we'll have to talk about that with staff or as a committee as to how we get up the time to do that. And in the meantime, if you have any additional questions that were not addressed, please feel free to reach out to Taiwo or to any of the staff members that spoke to get some answers. So, and feel free to share it with the rest of us. So with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap up. And thank you, everybody, for the presentations and for being here today. Can I have a motion to adjourn?